this portion of the program on project management overview, what I'd like to do is to focus on some of the key people issues that we encounter when we talk about managing projects. Specifically, some of the topics that I'll be covering here will include things like what are some of the traits of effective project managers, what are the competencies that we associate with effective project workers, whether they're project managers or other team members, and also we'll be taking a look at the project management professionalism and the perspective of the Project Management Institute on what it is that project managers and other project professionals should be aware of, what they should know as they do their project management work. So those will be that'll be the items that we'll be covering on, that we'll be focusing on in this section. Let me first talk about characteristics of people who are effective in working in project environments. Now, in a previous discussion, we saw that by definition projects are about achieving results, and that when we discussed that, we saw that people who gravitate to management positions in the project management area tend to be people who are obsessed with the achievement of results. So one of the major characteristics that we can identify with effective project professionals is that they are results-oriented. I think that many people are less concerned with producing physical results than operating in environments where you're going through routine types of processes. Most office environments that we encounter are fundamentally reactive, okay, where managers react to inputs that come to them from the environment on the outside or from within the organization, and basically their job is to conduct certain fundamental processes, get budgets together, plan weekly meetings, these kinds of things, and so on and so forth. It's not, though, about producing deliverables. Project professionals are primarily producing deliverables. That's the results that we're talking about. Okay, so that's a major characteristic. Another characteristic is that project professionals have to be able to focus on the details of project work at the same time while keeping track of the big picture. Okay, they have to be able to view the project both from the 35,000 foot level as well as the 5,000 foot level simultaneously. Not easy to do. Very few of us have personalities that allow us to zoom in and zoom out in our views of the project that readily. Another key characteristic of project professionals is that they have to have a high tolerance for ambiguity. This may seem strange at first, because I think people who aren't really familiar with what happens on projects tend to think of project management as a profession where everything is planned very carefully, almost like launching some kind of military operation, where all the details are planned out carefully, and then fundamentally we implement to the plan. Anyone who's been involved in military operations knows that the fundamental rule of implementing military plans is that within the first few moments of battle, the plan is no longer valid. What really becomes important, even in military operations, is developing people who know the general mission that the organization, or the project in the case of projects, the basic mission that needs to be achieved, to have experience to know how to operate flexibly in situations that arise where you didn't anticipate these things happening, this kind of a situation. So it turns out then people who are going to be effective in a project environment have to be able to cope with high levels of ambiguity. As we saw when we discussed the definition of what is a project, we saw projects are unique. So every project is different in some respect from every other project. And even on fairly routine projects where you think you've experienced everything that could possibly happen, you find on a new project suddenly some things are different. Okay, and things aren't as clear as you thought they were going to be. So that's an important trait of effective project professionals, a high tolerance for ambiguity. Tied to that is the high tolerance for ambiguity is also a need that effective project professionals have, that they don't get disappointed very easily. If you get disappointed easily and things are constantly going wrong, and Murphy's Law tells us they will be going wrong, then you're going to get discouraged and you're not going to be able to do effective project work. So it is very helpful if you have a good sense of humor. Most of the top gun project managers that I've worked with over the years, these are people who've managed to carry out major project responsibilities, hundreds of millions of dollars of responsibility, and they've been able to do a good job running major projects for many years. All of these people have a good sense of humor. They realize that if you take things too seriously, especially when things go wrong, you're going to be eaten up. So it's better to be a little bit philosophical, have a good sense of humor, and recognize that for every 2 steps you go forward, it's often the case that you've got to go 1 step back. Now, if you've noticed in discussing these various traits of effective project professionals, I haven't said, well, they've got to be technically excellent. And that's one of the big debates we've had in project management for a long, long time. To what extent do effective project professionals, particularly those who are leading the project, need to be technically sharp? And the answer to that question is not very clear-cut. As I said just a moment ago, you better have a high tolerance for ambiguity. For the most part, actually executing a project as the project manager should not be a major technical undertaking. The project manager's job is to make sure that the resources are in place, that the plans are in place, that the people have the right kinds of attitudes and skills and abilities to ultimately achieve the results that we're striving to achieve. That's really what it's about. Sometimes having good political skills is 10 times more important than being technically capable. So there's to deal with the ambiguity of the project environment, to deal with the fact that many of the people who are on your team are borrowed resources who don't want to be there. Okay, so that you need to have good motivation skills to get these people excited about the project. You begin seeing that some of the technical issues aren't as important as many people tend to think when they first get involved with project management. Now, there are exceptions to the rule. For example, on major state-of-the-art scientific projects, it often is a requirement that you have someone with a very high technical reputation lead the team, not because their technical skills are needed to solve the problems as such, but because if you're going to have the team members follow somebody, they want to make sure they're following someone who's perceived to be excellent. And so they want the person who's leading the team, the technical team members want the person who's leading the team to be someone who's had a lot of experience dealing with the kinds of struggles and technical issues that the team members, are encountering during the course of a project. So there are occasions when technical expertise of the project leader, the project manager, may be required, but it's primarily for motivational purposes, for psychosocial purposes, and not because you need the person who's running the project to be heavily technically involved. In fact, one of the big problems we have in project management, particularly with engineering and information technology projects, is that project managers sometimes see themselves as being the technical lead of the project, and they start micromanaging the team, telling the team members technically what they should be doing, and they can get in the way of progress. Okay, now ultimately, I guess that when we're asking, well, what kind of technical skills should the project manager have, ultimately the answer has to be dependent on the circumstances you're facing. Certainly, as we just saw, there are times when it's it may be important to have a good technical reputation, anyhow, to get people to follow you. On other occasions, having good customer relation skills, good team building skills, good resource acquiring skills may be far, far more important skills to have than somebody who's technically sharp. Let's carry the discussion of what we're looking for in project professionals a little farther now. And I'd like to spend a few moments talking about project management competence. And I've written a book on in this area. It's called Project Management Competence. And it's based on a couple of years of research I did in the area of competence. Back in the early 1990s through the mid-1990s, I was Director of Certification for the Project Management Institute for a 6-year period of time, the very beginning, January of 1990 through January of 1996. And during these 6 years, I was dealing 6 days, 7 days a week with issues of assessing competence of project professionals. I was dealing with this, as I said, all week long, even weekends. I was dealing with it several hours a day. And I was directing the project management certification effort as a volunteer. At the time I was a professor, and this is some volunteer work I was doing. But during those 6 years, I had a chance to get involved with many people who've given a lot of thought to what project management competence is. I also was in charge of maintaining an instrument, the certification examination, whose focus was on trying to assess knowledge-based competence in project management. And so I was in a situation where I began thinking very heavily about what does competence mean in a project management environment. Towards the end of the 1990s, after I'd stepped down as certification director, I spent a couple of years working on this book on project management competence, bringing together my experience as director of certification, other experience I had back in the 1960s and 70s and 80s as someone very heavily involved with evaluation of technical and non-technical programs, and based also on some more recent research I had been doing on competence. And let me share with you then my conclusions. Let me share with you the basic thrust of what I write about in the book. First of all, when we talk about project management competence, we have to recognize we're really talking about competence at 3 levels. Now, most of us, when we talk about project management competence, focus on competence at the level of the individual project professional, the team members, the project leaders, these kinds of people. And this is certainly an important area for exploration, competence of individual people. Okay, now there are 2 other levels of competence that we need to focus on as well if we're going to be competent as organizations, teams, individuals in doing our project work. And I just mentioned the other 2 levels. You need to have competence at the level of teams, and you need to have competence at the level of the organization. So project management competence is really, if you visualize 3 circles, each circle reflecting one of these levels of competence, is really 3 circles intersecting. You know, the competence of the individuals, you have competence of teams, you have competence of the organization. Now, think why it's necessary to approach competence in this way. It's pretty obvious when you reflect on it. Certainly, if we're going to have project management competence in our operations, we need to have good people. Okay, we need to have competent individuals. And in project management, competent individuals can be, the competence of individuals can be broken into 3 sub-areas of competence. One sub-area of competence for individuals is knowledge-based competence. Do the individuals who are working on the project team know the basic tools and techniques of project management? Do they know the basic principles? Do they know what a project is? Do they know how to schedule projects using techniques like PERT charts and Gantt charts and milestone charts? Those would be the knowledge-based competencies very specifically associated with doing project work. And as I mentioned earlier, it's those competencies, the knowledge-based competencies, that the Project Management Institute's certification exam focuses on. If you take and pass the Project Management Institute certification exam, this is telling the world at large that you know your stuff in terms of the knowledge associated with project management practice. You know the basic knowledge, you have insights on how to do scheduling, on how to do resource allocations, on risk management, contract management, and so on and so forth. So there are some core knowledge competencies that you should be familiar with, and by passing the exam, it's an outward and visible sign that you have some mastery of the knowledge-based competencies. But this doesn't mean that you can actually effectively run a team or a project. Okay, so it's not enough just to have a lot of book knowledge in your head. You also have to have social skills. So that's the second area of individual competence that needs to be developed. Social skills. The capacity to lead people. The capacity to manage conflict when it arises, and conflict's constantly arising on projects. The capacity to empathize with other people. Okay, even people you don't particularly like, to be able to see things from their point of view. Not to run around being angry at people all the time. Okay, so these are some of the social skills that you need to have. Remember, in actually running a project, if you're a project leader or a project manager, most of your energy is not going to be sitting down at a computer with spreadsheets working on your budgets and your schedules and resource allocations. If you're spending all your time on the computer computing budgets and schedules and resource allocations, who's running the project? Most of your time is dealing with people, trying to get them to perform in the way they're supposed to perform, trying to acquire resources, trying to talk to functional managers to get their cooperation to help you work with your team members and to get more of the good people that you need to have to get your job done. So certainly the knowledge-based competencies are important, but so are the social skills competencies. Even here, I don't think that's enough. I think you also have to focus on developing a third area of individual competence, and that's what I call business sense. This doesn't mean that you need to go out and get an MBA to be effective in leading project teams and managing projects. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is, though, that you have basic business sense as you're out there doing project work. Business sense, for example, means that you recognize that if you have let's say you have a high-paid engineer who's being loaned to your team for 4 days, that you don't have that engineer sitting down answering telephones. Even if you're missing someone to answer the phones, it's much more cost-effective to hire some temporary worker to answer the phones than to have this engineer's time misappropriated. Okay, common business sense means that you recognize that ultimately on your project you have to be sensitive to the fact that the revenue that the project that will bring the organization has to exceed the costs. I mean, profit is revenue minus cost, just recognizing that sometimes, especially technical people say, well, you can never spend too much in order to have a good technical product. And the answer is, of course you can spend too much. You can spend your organization into bankruptcy. So with business sense, we're talking about just common sense, the kind of common sense that someone who's even running a hot dog stand might have, that they want to be running that hot dog stand and staying in business. There's certain basic business issues that they have to contend with in order to survive and do well. So to recapitulate, competence at the level of the individual really falls into three areas. There's got to be knowledge-based competence on project management knowledge. You need to have good social skills. You've got to be competent in that sense to be able to deal with other people, because you're going to be dealing with other people all the time on your project. And then also you have to have good business sense. The second area of competence that I mentioned earlier is competence of the team itself. And very little work has been done in this area. Lots and lots of work has been done on assessing competence of individuals in various ways. And as I mentioned, we had this certification exam. It's been around for just about 2 decades now, and it does a pretty good job of assessing the competence of individuals. We don't have a lot of insights on how do you assess team competence. Now, what do we mean by team competence? Well, we recognize it's not enough just to have a bunch of smart people working together to achieve some project goals as a team. The issue is, are they really a team in the sense that they can work together in a collaborative fashion, that their major concern is by working together that they can achieve a lot more than if they try to work alone. Also, Katzenbach and Smith book called The Wisdom of Teams, which is probably the best-selling book of all time on teams and team building, points out that ultimately a competent team, an effective team, is one that's able to achieve its performance goals. Having a good team doesn't mean that at the end of the day the team members sing songs together and hug each other and shake hands. Having an effective team fundamentally means that these people can work together to do a great job in achieving the performance objectives. So what we need then to do is to have competent teams in the sense of clusters of people who work together to meet the project goals, to achieve the performance objectives. In assessing team-based competence, then, some of the things we want to look at, for example, is the attitude of the team players. Do they have a good attitude to the project, towards the project? Do they have a good attitude towards each other? We also want to look at things like, do the team members, each of them, do the things they're supposed to do? Even little things. Does someone, when you're holding team meetings, do you find that George always arrives 10 minutes late to the meeting? Always. If George is always arriving late, this is not a good sign. It indicates that George does not respect the time of the other people, this kind of a thing. So this idea then of assessing team competence gets a little tricky because it deals with a lot of psychological factors, and it deals with factors of organizational and group behavior. The third level of competence is assessing competence at the organizational level. And here we've actually had a lot of work done over the years. Back in the 1960s, Japan created this thing called the Deming Prize, which which was a prize that was offered to companies that were considered excellent in terms of contributions to quality, producing good quality products and services and this kind of a thing. And with the Deming Prize, we began to develop methodologies to assess organizational competence systematically. Later on, the United States, in a sense, copied the Deming Prize when they created the Baldrige Award back in the 1980s. Back in the 80s, we also had the rise of something called ISO 9000. ISO stands for International Organization of Standards, and ISO 9000 is now the global standard for quality. We have in the software development area, throughout the 90s, very rapid growth of something called the capability maturity model, which is trying to assess the competence of organizations in delivering high-quality software products and so on. So over the last 30-40 years, we've gotten better and better at trying to assess effectiveness, competence of organizations. And I think when we talk about organizational competence, it should be clear what we're saying is, does the organization provide us with the infrastructure and the support we need as individuals and as teams to do our jobs effectively? For example, if our projects involve using lots of equipment, do we have well-maintained equipment that doesn't have to be state-of-the-art necessarily, but that's certainly reflecting current good practice? If we're given poorly maintained equipment or obsolete equipment, it's very hard to see how, even if the team is great and the individuals are great, it's hard to see how you're going to have lots of project success in such an environment. Does the organization, here's another issue of competence, promote open thinking? Does it try to promote people to think out of the box instead of having very narrow tunnel vision thinking? Does the organization permit people to criticize processes and things that they think are damaging project performance? Or is everyone expected to just, if they see things are going wrong, you just keep your eyes kind of averted, keep your eyes down, keep your mouth shut? That's the way to get ahead. In that second environment where people got to keep their mouth shut and they're afraid to raise issues, you have a disaster waiting to happen. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about organizational competence then, is having organizations that create environments that allow the teams and individuals to operate effectively. If any one of those levels of competence are weak, then it's going to be difficult to have consistent project success in that case. If the organization isn't supporting individuals and teams, we just saw that the teams and individuals can't do their jobs properly. If you have very smart people operating in good organizations who just don't believe in teamwork, you're going to have problems. Or if you have fundamentally a good supportive team structure and good organizations, but the individuals themselves really aren't qualified to do the project work, you're going to have troubles as well. Let's take a look at what many people broadly call project management professionalism. When we talk about project management professionalism, what we're saying is that people who are on project teams and who are leading these teams, if they're really going to be excellent in doing project work, have to view project management from a larger perspective. They have to have commitment not just to their organization, the entity in which they work, to do their job from 9 o'clock till 5 p.m., 9 a.m. till 5 p.m., get the job done, and then come back, and you can depend on me to be there during the workday. You have to go beyond that, especially if you're going to excel in doing project management work. And you have to start looking at the broader issues of the profession itself. Now, the guardian of the project management profession is to a large extent an organization called the Project Management Institute. PMI is headquartered in the United States, but it's moving towards being a more global organization. By the year 2003, it had over 105,000 members, I believe, which is interesting to think about, because back when I got active in the Project Management Institute in the late 1980s, the total number of members we had would be between 7,000 and 8,000 people. So during the 1990s and into the early 2000s, you can see there's been this tremendous growth of interest in project management, as reflected just in the increasing size of the PMI, the Project Management Institute. PMI, in order to maintain professionalism of the profession, has established a set of standards, project management standards, which are now pretty much, I think, acknowledged to be global standards for project management theory and practice. And the standards are captured in a work called A Guide to the Project Management Body of Knowledge. Okay, so it's called A Guide to the Project Management Body of Knowledge. And we all often just use a shortcut, and we refer to it as the PMBOK, P-M-B-O-K. That's just abbreviation from for the term Project Management Body of Knowledge. Incidentally, for those of you who are familiar with the PMBOK, I do want to point out that in 1996, when a new edition of the PMBOK came out, we added, those of us actively involved in the project management profession, added the words "a guide to the" in front of PMBOK, because previously the PMBOK we just called the Project Management Body of Knowledge, and we said, well, this is our body of knowledge. And then some of the people on the standards committee at PMI recognized in the mid-1990s that the body of knowledge, the project management body of knowledge, is what resides in our collective heads as professionals in the project management area. The body of knowledge is changing second by second. It's the collective insights, wisdom, experiences of all the hundreds of thousands of people who are leading project teams and managing projects. So at very best, what the Project Management Institute or any organization can do is try to create a roadmap, okay, that allows people to have insights into the collective body of knowledge of the community. So that's why they call it a guide to the project management body of knowledge. We're not pretending that this document that's a couple of hundred pages long captures everything. And in fact, the moment a document is printed up and published and distributed, it's already becoming obsolete. So the very best, we can just capture, in a sense, a guide to the body of knowledge. We can't capture the body of knowledge itself. Okay, so anyhow, the PMBOK guide, as it were, tells us that project management, in structuring project management, the project management discipline, what we need to do is to look at the structure along two dimensions. Actually, you can actually draw two dimensions, one going up and down vertically, one going horizontally. On the vertical dimension, you can identify 5 project management processes. The first of these 5 processes is called initiation processes. And what happens with these processes is that we are concerned with prioritizing various options that we're encountering in pursuing our projects. What we need to do is to sort through our needs, our requirements, to try to determine what it'll take to address these needs and requirements. What kind of project solutions might be the best solutions to enable us to achieve our ultimate needs and requirements, this kind of thing. One of the outcomes of the initiation processes is we finally make a choice. We decide to pursue a particular project solution. The second process is called the planning process, and as the name implies, with the planning process is we get down to the nuts and bolts of things like scheduling, budgeting, allocating human and material resources. With planning processes, we're heavily involved with dealing with the well-known project management tools, such as cumulative cost curves, S-curves, such as earned value, it would be earned value management in establishing baselines, per CPM scheduling techniques, these kinds of things. Through the planning process, what we try to do is establish what we call baselines, schedule baselines, cost baselines, resource baselines, which provide us with the guidance we need to carry out our project. The third process area is called execution processes. And here we're talking about actually executing the project, implementing the project, doing what we said we were going to do when we were developing our project baselines, our project plans. What's interesting is, even as you're executing, going through the execution process, executing the plan, let's say, you should be capturing information on what is actually happening. Okay, because that becomes very important when we go into the fourth process area, which is controlling processes. When you talk about control in project management, what you're talking about is comparing your baselines, what you plan to happen, with what actually happened. So during the execution processes, you gather data on what's actually happened. During planning processes, you have baselines describing what should be happening. So with controlling processes, you examine the actual against the plan. And what you're looking for here are gaps between the plan and the actual. If you encounter major gaps that seem to be unattractive, then one of the issues you have to contend with is it worth closing? Is this a serious issue? Is it worthwhile trying to close the gap? If we want to close the gap, what steps do we need to take to close the gap? The fifth process that PMI identifies in its structuring of project management discipline is closeout processes. And what we're talking about here is bringing projects to closure in a systematic, effective fashion. The kinds of things you should be concerned with when you close out a project are things like, have we reallocated resources properly? Do we have customer satisfaction? Have we conducted what we call a post-implementation review? That's very popular now, PIR. Post-implementation review, to make sure that we've learned the lessons that we hope to learn from this project effort. So taken together then, we have 5 processes, and let me just summarize them. You have initiation processes, planning processes, execution processes, okay, controlling processes, and closeout processes. Now these 5 processes are going to be matched in the PMBOK against 9 knowledge areas. And this sounds more complicated than it really is. It's really not that complicated. We're talking about a simple matrix here that's 5 units high and 9 units wide. And those 9 knowledge areas represent PMI's best attempt to describe 9 major competencies that project professionals should be familiar with. Okay, so let me go through these quickly. One of the 9 knowledge areas is scope management. Scope management is referring to the knowledge that one has that pertains to defining the overall scope of a project. There's many tools that you can use in scope management that are useful. A work breakdown structure, WBS for example, is a scoping tool. It shows how the work is going to be divided for the overall project. You have things called scope statements, which are relatively short statements that define what it is that the project should achieve under what constraints, this kind of thing. Scope management is also concerned with managing changes that occur during a project so you don't have scope creep. One of the big evils of project management is having something called scope creep, where initially you've designed to build a horse, and then with additions and changes and this and that are out of control, you wind up developing a camel. So scope management is concerned with things like change control as well. A second knowledge competency, a second knowledge area is time management. And this is the most famous knowledge competency in project management. Time management is. With time management, we're dealing with the famous tools and techniques that we have in project management. These are the scheduling tools and techniques, PERT charts, critical path method charts, Gantt charts, milestone charts, earned value management techniques for planning and maintaining schedule control. To a large extent, those of us who work in project management are basically dealing with the only truly non-renewable resource in the universe. Time is the only truly non-renewable resource. When time is gone, it's gone. You cannot recover it. Money can be recovered. If something breaks, you can fix it, recover in that sense. But when time is gone, it's gone. So we're supposed to be the masters of managing time. And managing time today is very important. Third knowledge-based competency is cost management. I call the cost management competency the Leonardo da Vinci competency because it really covers a very broad array of things that people should know something about. For example, cost management deals with a very important topic of cost estimation. On all of our projects, remember, our project is unique. We're dealing with uncertainty, with risk. It's very hard sometimes to predict what it's going to cost to do the job. And so you've got to be pretty good at cost estimating if you're going to develop plans that are realistic. So cost estimation. Cost management includes a little knowledge of economics, understanding things like concepts like increasing returns to scale, learning economies, those kinds of things, the learning effect. It involves a little accounting. It involves understanding, for example, it certainly doesn't hurt if you know what a balance sheet is. It doesn't hurt if you understand what a cash flow statement is, these kinds of things. These are the kinds of insights. If you have these insights, it'll help you do a better job of managing your projects, particularly if you're given responsibility for looking at the financials. It also involves a little finance. If you have a project that's going to last for more than 3 or 4 months, you really should be, the cost data you're examining really should go through things like present value analyses, discounted cash flow analyses. When you're trying to assess the merits of project A over project B, one of the tools you should be looking at is internal rate of return. So these are these are not difficult tools. These are the kinds of things you can learn in a classroom environment very quickly. The issue is, have project staff taken the effort to learn these tools, and then do they actually use these tools once they're actually running projects? So cost management then also has to do with budgeting, and it has to do with cost control. So that's our Leonardo da Vinci competency area, knowledge-based competency area. A fourth area that PMI has identified as a key knowledge area is what they call human resource management knowledge. And I think that title is probably a little off target. Most of us, when we use the term human resource management, are talking about things like personnel and employee types of issues and job descriptions and so forth. And what PMI really means when they refer to human resource management is the whole issue of managing people. So human resource management knowledge competencies involve you understanding things like the theory and practice of conflict management, the motivation theory and practice, these kinds of things. Now these first 4 competencies I mentioned, scope management, time management, cost management, and people management, have been basic project management competencies since project management was first developed in the 1940s during World War II. If you talk to someone who was managing projects back in 1955 and said, these are the 4 competencies, knowledge competencies, effective project managers must possess, Okay, scope management, time management, cost management, people management. Back in 1955, they would have agreed with you completely. It's the next 5 knowledge areas that we're going to be adding to our list that show how project management has very much evolved with the with changes in management and the business environment. Okay, the 5th competency then is risk management. Today, one of the pervasive realities of life is filled with risk. We saw with the World Trade Center that the risk can be risk of bodily harm. We saw with you can see with the collapse of the stock market that risk might be in the financial area. We saw with Enron and Global Crossing and with these other companies that there's the risk that because of unethical practices, people may lose their jobs and pensions. Okay, and then on projects, our primary risk areas that we're concerned with are risks of slipping our schedule, not meeting the specifications, and having cost overruns. So if you're going to manage projects, you got to know something about managing risk. The 6th area is quality management. And I think we all recognize quality management is something that everyone's concerned with today. Organizations that aren't perceived to deliver high quality goods and services are organizations that are going to go out of business. When we talk about quality management at PMI, we take the ISO 9000 perspective. And ISO 9000 says that quality has to be defined in terms of customer satisfaction. So ISO 9000, that perspective on quality, and this is the world standard, states that quality is what the customer says quality is. So that's the approach that we take at PMI. I think it's on target. It certainly represents current thinking on quality management. Another area, okay, another area would be contract and procurement management. PMI calls it procurement management. They used to call it contract management. But everything today is being outsourced. Everything is being done by people on the outside. Many of our organizations fundamentally are becoming contracting organizations, contracting out work. More and more work is being done by outsiders, less work by our core staff. So with contract management, you need to know things like how do you put together a solicitation, okay? How do you invite people to bid on something that you want, work that you want to be carried out? How do you actually evaluate the bids? If you're a contractor, how do you write a proposal? Once an award is made, what does it take to actually physically administer a contract? So these are some of the contract management issues that need to be dealt with. An eighth knowledge area that PMI identifies is, I guess, I would argue it's probably the single most important of the 9 knowledge areas. It's communication management. Because in the final analysis, if I'm a project manager and I can't communicate with my customer, the need for customer support. If I can't communicate with my boss, the need for management support. If I can't communicate with my team, the need for them to do a good job and to achieve the project goals. Okay, if I can't communicate with my vendor, what it is that I need and what I want. Okay, if communication breaks down, then all the other competencies don't amount to an awful lot. So basically, effective project management, effective project professionals have to have pretty much a mastery of what communication is. Now, communication occurs constantly in the life of a project manager. When you're making a briefing to the customer, you're communicating. Can you do it effectively? Do you focus on the right things? Is your communication skill so bad that you're scaring the customer? Okay, you don't want that to happen. When you ask for resources and do a briefing to senior management, again, you want to communicate effectively. You don't want to give them too much information because you're inviting them to micromanage you. You don't want to give them too little information because they think they'll be making decisions in a vacuum. And then again, with the project team members, if they're unhappy, remember many of these people are borrowed, they don't want to be there, you have to communicate with them the importance of doing a good job and try to inspire them to do the best job they can. The last competency, the ninth competency, or ninth knowledge area, is what PMI calls integration management. Okay, fundamentally, integration management says, okay, we've identified 8 other knowledge areas. What does it take to bring all these things together to deliver solutions effectively to our customers? So the ninth area is fundamentally focused on tying together everything so that we operate with all these different knowledge areas without lots of conflict between them, without, in software development we say with seamless interfaces. That's the term we like to use. Now let's go back and take a look at how this knowledge structure we've identified here, or this structure of the discipline, applies to helping us be better professionally. I'm going to start talking explicitly about something called the PMP examination. Okay, the PMI certification examination leads to the conferring of something called Project Management Professional Status, PMP. So many people then just refer to the certification exam as the PMP exam. The underlying structure of the exam is tied to this 5 by 9 matrix we just described. When people at the Project Management Institute on the certification committee are creating questions to put onto the certification examination, what they're doing is they'll go into some of these cells. For example, they may go into, let's say, the planning phase, and then they go into the cell that deals with communication management. And they'll say, what kind of questions should we be asking on the PMP exam that deals with communications issues during the planning stage? For example, when we're planning our project, we need to communicate with functional managers to make sure resources are available that we can put into our plan. So let's ask some questions dealing with that particular issue. So if you want to understand then what the PMP exam is all about, you have to understand the underlying PMBOK structure, okay, for defining the project management discipline. The exam itself is, you can call it typically American, and I'm not sure that's a compliment or criticism, but it is typically American in the sense that it's a multiple choice examination. It has 200 questions, and about close to 90% of the questions, I believe the last count showed that there was 89% of the questions focus on the 3 central processes that I described before: planning process, execution processes, and control processes. So when people are studying for the examination, they should recognize that only something like 10 or 11% of the questions, certainly a relatively small number of questions, deal with initiation and closeout processes. We're not saying that initiation and closeout aren't important for project management. What we're saying is that the exam doesn't address a lot of questions in that area. Another thing, the examination recently, in the beginning of the 2000s, began asking questions dealing with professional responsibility. Professional responsibility, many people have taken to mean ethics issues. And PMI, Project Management Institute, has a code of conduct. It has something called standards of conduct, and these are short documents, and people who are part of the project management profession are expected to have a good sense of what good ethical practice is in the context of project management. So there are a number of questions on the certification exam dealing with ethical and professional responsibility issues. One question I get a lot from people who want to take the exam is, what is the pass rate on the exam, and From the late 1990s through the early 2000s, my understanding, again these numbers may change and all that, is that the pass rate is, the number of people who pass it is somewhere around 77, more than 70%. So this says that the odds are in your favor. People who take the exam, you have a reasonably good chance of passing it. Obviously, if you're going to pass it, you have to prepare for it, so you have to be prepared. Another question is, when you take the exam, how many questions do you need to pass to get a passing grade? And the answer here, again, PMI is not fully straightforward about this, but by the best reckoning, it's about 70%. Again, about 68, 69, 70% of the questions you need to get right. If there are 200 questions on the exam, that means you want to get 140 or more right in order to pass the examination. Now, if you go through this whole process, you study for the exam, and it's very important in studying for the exam to thoroughly master the PMBOK guide, okay, to study that thing very carefully. But even then, you have to recognize that's not enough. There's a lot more knowledge on project management than what's contained in the PMBOK guide. The PMBOK guide is a roadmap. It's a guide to the knowledge areas. It's not a comprehensive coverage. So you need to do other study as well beyond the PMBOK guide in order to pass the exam. But if you haven't reviewed the PMBOK guide, I can't see how you could possibly pass the exam. So if you pass the exam and you get the PMP designation, what does this mean? Well, especially multinational corporations have really bought into the PMP exam concept. Companies like AT&T, Motorola, Hewlett-Packard, IBM, companies like this really encourage their project staff to get involved with the certification process and to go through the exam. Even if your organization isn't supporting you in this area, I think you'll see that throughout the world more and more people are recognizing that someone with the PMP is someone who certainly has good mastery of the project management knowledge competencies. I think what you need to do is to look into seeing whether something like this would help you professionally. Most people will. As of the year 2002, there was something like 54,000 people who had the PMP designation. So look into it.